Hi again. I'm Mark Goddard. I'm a principal at Intuitive based out of our London office. Normally at this time of year, we would hold our client event in London to catch up over a glass or two of wine with our construction friends, both old and new. Although I wish we could meet in person, I'm grateful that we can meet at all, and also grateful that we can open up this event to people from across the globe. When thinking of a message for this event, I decided that I really wanted to convey the passion and enthusiasm that we at Intuitive have in helping to develop a sustainable built environment, and to convey how hard we work across the company to apply sustainable solutions to our projects. I won't say much more now, except that I'm really looking forward to hearing what our guest speaker, Tom Bloxham, has to say. However, before I introduce Tom, I'd like to set a few housekeeping rules. First of all, Tom will share a keynote address before being joined on stage by Intuitive's Tom Greenhow, Emily King and Tristan Truans for a broader discussion on building a sustainable future. If you have any questions for our speakers, please use the raise hand function or type your question into the chat and we'll answer them in the dedicated Q&A portion of the event. To help improve the event and optimize call quality, I would appreciate if you could turn off your video and microphones. Please note we are recording this event for sharing on our channels. And finally, I invite you to visit our event website for more information on all of today's speakers. I believe Alison has just put the link in the chat. I'm now pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Tom Bloxham, MBE. Tom is chairman and founder of award-winning regeneration company Urban Splash, which has received over 420 awards to date for architecture, design and business success. The company is responsible for development projects in many cities across the country, including Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, Leeds, Sheffield, Bristol and Plymouth. In 1999, Tom was awarded an MBE for services to architecture and urban regeneration. Tom also upholds a number of other positions, including chairman of Manchester International Festival, the Manchester United Foundation and the Bloxham Charitable Trust. When he's not working, Tom enjoys art, cross-country ski touring, drinks and watching his beloved Manchester United. We won't, though, hold that against him. Tom, welcome and great to have you with us. The stage is all yours.
Mark, thank you very much. I hope people can see me. My screen's a bit disconcerting here, but I'm going to try to share my screen if I can. And hopefully something is working there. And I'm going to show you a presentation, I hope. If I could understand how this worked. Slideshow. See the quality. Slideshow. Apologies. Excuse me. That's better. Is that visible to people?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, great. So thank you very much. Apologies for that. I'm going to do a short presentation here about Urban Splash, House by Urban Splash and sustainability, and really about my journey and our journey of how we've gone as a company, as a developer, from restoring old buildings to being increasingly interested in MMC, modern methods of construction, and sustainable construction. And I'm going to illustrate this with some slides, and I'm just going to start with a quick film which really is called Live Well by Design, and this is really where we've ended up as an introduction. So Urban Splash today is very much focused on modular housing with a business called House by Urban Splash. But it's been a long and interesting journey, and I thought it'd be worth sharing a bit about how we ended up in the place we are, and a bit about why sustainability has been so important to us. For those of you who don't know Urban Splash, we are a relatively small private company based out of Manchester in the UK. Developed about £1 billion worth of developments, set up in 27 years ago. And I suppose the DNA that ties our different various projects together is a love of architecture, a love of great design, and a love of doing various different buildings, some big, some small, some new builds, some refurbishments, but all with great designers, great architects, and all with an interest in sustainability. Geographically, it's UK and UK regions. And to give an idea of the scale, around 250 colleagues working, but very vertically integrated, doing everything from the land to managing. Some of the nice things that people have said about us, in particular, that Universe is great as property developer, although for a Manchester developer, pleased to hear that. But a bit about my story. I was born in 1963. I saw the Apollo 11 land on the moon, and I saw the sort of 60s, 70s, 80s technology change the world, and I was sort of brought up on punk music, which had a big influence of me, of seeing the Sex Pistols get on stage, not being able to play any instruments and try and change the world. And that punky, radical attitude has stayed with us ever since. And so we started Urban Splash with just literally 2 men in a shed. My colleague Jonathan Falking and myself did our first building, an old chemical factory in Liverpool. And at the time, nobody lived in the city centres. And we converted this for £27 a square foot. We sold it for £60 a square foot. But if you take away the television, it still looks pretty contemporary, I think, even today. And right from day one, we was interested in the space outside the buildings as the buildings themselves. And if you just look at the roofscape here, there's this 2-story building. Simply by demolishing this, we created a new town square called Concert Square, the first one in Liverpool for 100 years. And very much about conserving old buildings. Many of them were due for demolition, and restoring these. And in many ways, the most sustainable building is one that already exists. This is Manchester's Northern Quarter. And we very quickly became interested not just in buildings, but in areas. And so the Northern Quarter of Manchester, that many of you may know and love, used to be called the shitty part of Manchester behind Market Street. And I was really working with the council the weekend with the idea of a new name and a new identity, as well as taking old buildings and converting them. We started to get noticed by the Prince of Wales and others, and had a legacy of working with historic buildings like this one in Liverpool, the Collegiate, and restoring them and bringing them back into use. An old church brought first into an art gallery and then into a restaurant, and joint ventures with local authorities of using our skills, our finance, and taking on their assets in joint venture, give them a share of the upside, and bring them back into use. In 1999, we did our first new build. We had Richard Rogers chair the judges. We took the judging on in House of Lords with many of the editors of all the architectural journals you'll recognise. And we took a, not particularly exciting site, but working with a then unheard of architect called Glenn Howes, built his first big scheme in England called Timber Wharf. And then city centre regeneration started to get some momentum, and we took a whole series of buildings, converted them into residential, into offices, mills and Ancoats, offices in Liverpool, an old match factory in Liverpool, using transforming them. The scheme here we did in Budenberg with Foster and Partners. And this was the first time where we started experimenting in pepper potting different tenures. And in this building, we have homes for sale, we have homes for rent, we have shared ownership, we have affordable rents and market rents, all pepper potted around in the same building with the same spec and the same front door. And our experience of life is much better where people with different incomes mix together rather than gated communities of rich and poor separate. We then either had a very bad idea or a good idea at the wrong time of setting up a chain of boutique hotels, and potentially even worse idea of starting in Morecambe, but then hopefully a nice conversion on the Midland Hotel in Morecambe. And Bradford, Lister Mills, working with David Morley Architects in this case on the roof on some new pods. Ford Dunlop in Birmingham, the Rotunda, again iconic buildings brought back to life, old tower blocks rehoused, reused sustainably. Terraced housing brought back to life, but reinvented, putting the living room upstairs and the bedrooms downstairs. So finding new ways of using old buildings in Leeds, very much a sustainability on putting allotments in there on grounds for people to enjoy. Stalybridge, Manchester, and using different architects. And it originally started with Victorian buildings, the more modernist one. This was a building by SOM in Peel Tobacco headquarters in Lakeshore in Bristol. The first use of Corten steel, brought back to use, and an extension called the Copper Building. And some much more modest and perhaps uglier buildings. The ubiquitous 1990 spec office building, running to the end of the first 25-year leases, but just reinvented. So it's about using architecture and design to reinvent spaces and places, Royal William Yard here in Plymouth and Old Victualling Yard. And so we sort of learnt our trade, exploring old buildings and making places and using design and placemaking to change and transform buildings. Park Hill in Sheffield, a 1960s building, very run down, fell out of love by the city council, but a building we thought with great potential, a building built by young architects working for the local authority. And then the local authority fell out of love with it, and they saw it just as a concrete slum. But we thought something exciting could work with this one. We worked with Hawkins Brown and Studio Edgware West of renewing it, coming up with an idea. And the apartments actually, they're all double aspect, they're all duplexes, they're real quality apartments. And we rehoused all the existing residents who wanted to stay, again, some for social housing and also first-time buyers moving in, bringing economically active people, and for lower floors with the coolest brands in Sheffield, the architects, the designers, the filmmakers, a free public nursery, landscape, and we're now on site with later phases, and we're working with a charity called S1 Arts to make a permanent art centre in there. But very much about placemaking and a mix of uses. And so over the years, we developed different ideas of being vertically integrated: construction, residential management, commercial management, regeneration, housing, a PRS fund, a commercial portfolio. But we then started thinking about modular housing and how we're building. And we've been building houses with bricks and wet cement since Roman times. And we thought there must be a better way of building. So in 2006, we experimented with a steel frame system. And then more recently, we've been thinking about if we were to do housing rather than flats or apartments, new build housing, what would we do and how would we do it? And we looked at the RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects research, and they came out with some surprising research that 70% of the population didn't even consider buying new build, but would rather buy second-hand homes. And most things in life we buy, we'd rather buy a new build if we can afford it. We'd rather buy a new build car than second-hand. So why didn't people want to buy new build homes? And looking at the mass house builders, it's not the sort of place I want to live. It's not the sort of place most of my friends want to live. They have a business model which is very effective financially, particularly effective in a sustainable way, in our view, in that they cram in as many buildings as possible per acre, lots of small bedrooms, lots of tiny windows. They build incredibly efficiently and they're very profitable. But it's not the sort of place I wanted to live. And look how something like televisions have changed over the last 100 years. Every time you buy a new television, it's cheaper, it's better, it's twice the size, it's half the price of the last one. And yet our new build housing is getting more and more expensive and arguably no better and smaller. So what could we do about this? What would an urban splash house look like if we started from first principles and thinking about designing and building an urban splash house? And sort of two big steps for us. 2 and a bit years ago, we bought our own factory from SIG PLC. And last year we took on investment from Homes England and Sekisui House. And the rationale of that is we believe we're onto something. We believe we're making traction, but we also realised as a small private Manchester-based company, there's a limited speed at which we could grow, and we were ambitious how fast we could grow. And so we thought having shareholders like Homes England, part of UK government, would give us huge credibility, particularly local authority partners. And then Sekisui House. Now, I must admit, I never heard of Sekisui House before we did the deal, but we went on a search worldwide of who were the best house builders in the world. And Sekisui House built more houses than any other company. They started in 1960. This was their very first modular house that I quite like. Since then, they built 2.5 million houses. They build 45,000 homes a year, more than the top 4 house builders in the UK. And by scale, they're enormous, but perhaps better as the values. We talk about live well by design. They talk about making home the happiest place in the world. It's incredible in scale. They have 5 million square feet factories. The vast majority of their homes are carbon zero. They build most of their homes in factories, and they talk about changing the world through living and love of humanity. They employ 3,000 architects in-house. They employ 1,000 people in the R&D department. So this is a huge asset base, a huge resource for us to use to build our modular business. And in our modular business, we're thinking about 5 key themes. Superhuman, being about people, where we want to live, high ceilings, big windows, being design-led, working with the world's best designers, giving customers real choice, the same choice as they have when buying a car, buying most products. Of course, being green by default, and being modern, looking forward, not backward, not building pastiches. And giving customers real choice, letting them decide how big they want their homes, letting them configure on the website exactly how they want to live, kitchens upstairs, downstairs, open plans, cellular. And then how do we build them? We don't build them using hairy-ass builders. We don't build them battling the elements, battling the snow and the rain, using itinerant labour, which went out. We build them like we build our cars in factories. And 2 and a bit years ago, we bought our own factory. We can now build a house in under 2 weeks in a production line. It takes less than 14 days to build a house. They're built on a production line. At the end of that process, they're literally loaded on the back of a lorry. We can assemble 2 or 3 houses in a single day. Minimum disruption to residents and tenants and neighbours nearby. And this gives you a feel with a finished article. So very different from most mass house builders, high ceilings, big windows, but actually in many ways very similar to the ubiquitous Victorian or Georgian terrace. All the structures in the outside walls, high ceilings, big windows, you can clad them in anything you like. A lot of the hard work we've done already, got in BOPAS, getting mortgage approvals. We've been really pleased with the take-up of different people, young and old, buying our homes. And now on a business plan, going from a few hundred a year to a few thousand a year, and building these around the country. But for us, it's not just about the houses. As important, in fact, no more important, is the placemaking and the places we're building in there. And I'm now going to show you an example of a few of the schemes we've done and how the placemaking has worked. So this is New Islington in Manchester, a joint venture on many of our schemes with the local authority and national government. And this was a tough council estate called the Cardham Estate. If any of you have seen the TV series Shameless, this is where Shameless was based. And it was a tough estate, but it had a canal either side of it. And for us, it was about a master plan, working here with Will Alsop, connecting the 2 existing canals with a new canal, making a plan, doing a vision, describing a vision, making models, making a painting, not to be read literally, but to show people we want to change what was one of the worst places in Manchester into one of the best places. And then delivering on our master plan, putting a new pocket park, Cottonfield Park, the first park in Manchester for 100 years, building a marina, 43 houseboats, rehousing all the existing residents who want to stay, letting them design their own houses, letting them pick cutting edge architects like FAT, like De Metz, like May Architects, working with a great public school, private school in Manchester called MGS, sponsoring a free primary school for all to go to, working to set up a new GP surgery, building a CHIPS building, homes for sale and for rent and shared ownership, working, creating new jobs in an old disused mill that was derelict, bringing that back into life and creating hundreds of jobs, letting it to a company called Fanatics, and then building our modular houses and building a number of these throughout Manchester. For instance, taking a small scrap of land in New Islington the council owned, and with that land within a year, buying the land, getting planning, building 17 homes in this little bit of land, giving the council back a percentage of the sale every one, so they get proceeds of over £1 million, 4 shared ownership homes, helping the regeneration of Manchester and pushing forward. Another model we're doing is a CLT building called Mansion House. And this is like a modern version of old Georgian mansion house, but built entirely in CLT. A wonderful structure, a wooden-based structure like giant plywood. I'm sure many of you know more about it than me. But actually 6 guys in 10 weeks built the whole structure and got a waterproof shell. We're exposing the insides of it, showing off the structure. Very sustainable, huge amount of embodied carbon, much more sustainable, we believe, than carbon or steel as a building material. Double aspect flats, so multi-core, every flat is double aspect. It means every flat has got a view of the marina in this case. Every flat has got through ventilation and the ability to plan them either as open plan lofts as 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom. And we're just finishing our first scheme with some great views. And this will be New Islington when it's finished. And much more than just houses, creating a whole new community, the best bakery in Manchester, a variety of 10 years, 31% affordable housing, a nursery, residential houseboats, a festival, social rent housing, a health centre, the best car scales, and so on and so forth. Another scheme is up in the northeast, Smithstock, an old disused dockyard, closed many years ago with a loss of jobs. Coming up there, working out a master plan, describing the master plan, then executing that master plan with our modular houses, working with George Clark from Amazing Spaces on a special edition, building smokehouses, Simpson Huff architecture in this case, new restaurants, and that's what it looks like today. So making a real sense of place. Port Loop in Birmingham, 1,200 homes, big site near Birmingham city centre, actually an island site. Who knew there was an island right in Birmingham city centre? The canal runs all the way around it. The first thing we did here was put a new park in there, working with the community. Somewhere where we're doing a manifesto. The manifesto says we want green streets, not mean streets. We want places that are more friendly to people than cars. Working again with our modular housing being built, as well as conventional build housing, a community centre, community events, festivals, communal areas. And in this case, there's a hierarchy of public spaces. So a public park that everybody can use. And then for each of the houses, they have a private space, a little terrace. That's their private space just for them where they're having a barbecue, but also a communal place, which is private but shared between the community. So residents, kids can play out, can meet their neighbours. And we've seen values increase. Will Waters in Merseyside, joint venture with Peel, just about to go on site. Northstowe in Cambridgeshire, working with Homes England. This is our new sales pavilion, using most people do a porta cabin. Milton Keynes, working with National Trust in Windermere. So trying to build our homes throughout the country in a really sustainable way. We're lucky enough to win a number of awards, do a lot of work in joint venture, work with the best designers, very focused on brand. Find out more on our website or follow us on social media. We're looking for land across the country and very much focused on sustainable development and following the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we want to make more wonderful space like this across the country. And the last slide, which I suppose is really for us the essence of sustainability, about leaving our towns and cities, not less, but greater, more better and more beautiful than was left to us. And it's a privilege for many of us who are working in the built environment to be able to try and do this. And I hope that was useful for you. I've now got to find out how I can stop sharing my screen.
So if you just hit the X.
How does that work?
There we are.
Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thanks, Tom, for that. Absolutely brilliant presentation. As always, some fascinating stuff in there. Always so impressive, the body of work that you've generated over the years, and the ethos that you drive, that drives the company forward. It's really great listening to you, and you should be very proud of the work that you've done. Going forward, now I'd like to welcome Emily King, Tom Greenhow and Tristan Truans to the discussion. Emily heads up our Sustainable Buildings group. Tom leads our offsite and modular construction team, and Tristan heads up our building performance group. To kick off, though, I would just like to start first with a question to Tom Bloxham. What have you learned in your career that makes you confident that we as an industry can today achieve a sustainable built environment?
Well, it's a good question. In some ways, I'm not at all confident, to be honest with you. And in some ways, I see us still destroying perfectly good buildings, which I think is the most unsustainable way. The most sustainable building is one that already exists. When I was a kid growing up, people were demolishing Victorian mansions because they had rising damp and drafty windows and poor electrics. We never dreamed of doing that. When I started in business, people were destroying Victorian warehouses, which again we wouldn't do. Today, people are still destroying some quite good concrete buildings. So I think the first thing to do is to conserve and save existing buildings. But I think when we are reusing buildings, we've got to be very, very careful and very conscious of how we are reusing that. And I think the whole way we measure sustainability is, for me, questionable. We always see these amazing houses that win the Sustainable House of the Year. And yes, they're very well insulated, but often they're miles away from transport hubs, so they need cars. Till very recently, we've been prioritising gas over electric heating, for instance. So I think the way we judge things is difficult. I suppose what does make me confident though, is the increasing awareness amongst the public, and particularly amongst young colleagues, about how important the planet is and how important sustainability is. And whereas this wasn't even on many of our agendas many moons ago, it is becoming increasingly important. So I think everybody has got to be more and more focused on it. And certainly at Urban Splash, we are increasingly important. We're increasingly influenced and concentrating on the role we play in helping to conserve resources and make the world a better place to live.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I mean, that's a great response. I mean, I think since I've joined Intuitive, one of the things I've really noticed is just how passionate the young engineers are about sustainability and really making a difference and starting the conversation with clients, difficult conversations with clients and other designers. And and the three people we've got on the call today all represent the talent that we have within Intuitive. Tristan, I mean, you've been with the company a couple of years now. How would you, what would it entail to achieve a sustainable built environment? How do you see that panning out in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I mean, I think it takes, it's really going to take a laser focus by all of us in the design, engineering, and constructions industries to really maintain a constant pursuit of net zero or net zero ready designs, both as we retrofit existing buildings and when we build new. Tom, in his presentation at the start, mentioned, the idea of green by default, and I think that really is where we need to go. It's when we think about the targets that we have for trying to achieve our Paris climate ambitions, it's generally talked about of a net zero built environment by 2050. But I feel like what is often missed in that is that the length and lifespan of new systems and materials that are getting installed today almost takes it out to 2050. So if we're not designing and building and retrofitting in a way that is net zero ready so that it can be easily retrofitted to that goal, then we're just mortgaging our problems down the line. So really keeping that eye on the ball and trying to push low energy design as far as possible in all aspects.
Yeah, thanks. How about Emily? How do you think that it's going to pan out then with regard to the sustainable built environment?
I think we really need to see very close collaboration across all professionals of the built environment. This needs to be from manufacturing to post-construction and occupancy. There needs to be a really significant shift in the way that we approach buildings. So I think, Tom's presentation has done a really fantastic job at showing a great model for how we should be doing this. There needs to be collaboration across all stakeholders in the industry. It can't be a siloed approach. We need everybody that's going to be involved and affected by the projects to be involved in the decision making and the design process throughout from the beginning. There needs to be a lot of education as well to bring everybody in the industry up to speed with a level set understanding of what it's going to take to be designing for future. So there's organizations like the London Energy Transformation Initiative and the Carbon Leadership Forum in North America, which are doing really great work to bring those resources to be available to everybody, but particularly those in the built environment to build up our own knowledge and skill sets of how to solve these challenges together and make sure, to Tristan's point as well, that we are designing with the future in mind and not making short-term decisions, but making sure that we have this long-term vision and goal as well.
Great. Okay, then, so following on from that, then, what do you see over the next 5 years? What does sustainability look like for you over the next 5 years?
So I think in the next 5 years, I'm hopeful that we're going to be seeing a lot of policy changes. There is a lot of support and interest in the industry to be designing sustainably, but there's a big piece of it that is policy, and we need to be seeing a fairly rapid shift in policy to make high performance buildings the norm. And so, building codes have to be updated to be including these provisions to make sure that we are designing high performance. And there's been a lot in there to help with reaching operational carbon goals. But what about embodied carbon? It's something that's a bit not so much newer to the discussion, but it's kind of, it hasn't been discussed as much as operational carbon. So we really do need to make sure that the building codes are addressing what needs to be done to reduce embodied carbon of the built environment. Setting targets, setting these limits, these thresholds on what materials we can be using and what the embodied carbon should be in those materials. So I'm pretty encouraged by what I've seen so far. There's the Buy Clean acts that are taking place across the states, particularly on the West Coast, and those are setting thresholds for embodied carbon of materials. And then in Vancouver, they recently released their Climate Emergency Action Plan, which is seeking to reduce embodied carbon by 40% for new builds by 2030. And then really encouraging earlier this week for the C40 cities clean construction declaration, a few more cities joined on to that declaration. So that's cities across the globe, mayors that have signed this declaration that they are going to be taking really strong efforts to be reducing the impact of the built environment on greenhouse gas emissions. And so their goals are to reduce embodied carbon emissions by at least 50% for new builds and major retrofits by 2030. So it's a big goal. And, all the cities where we live and work have signed on to this. So London, New York, Los Angeles recently signed on. We've got Toronto and Vancouver. There's many more. So I think it needs to be more changes like this to get, the policy piece involved. And that's going to be the big driver for everybody else in the industry to be making these changes to the way that we design and build. Okay,
great. Thanks. How about Tristan? What do you think? Next 5 years for you then? What's the big shifts?
Yeah, I mean, this is an optimist's response, but I think there's going to be as the realities of the necessity of the energy efficiency and performance starts to really hit home and codes and legislation backstop that. I think we're really going to start to see a shift towards focusing on occupant health and comfort and neighborhood building. A lot of the things that we started to see come out in sort of the more recent work that Urban Splash has been doing. And that's really because as it becomes just standard that, this building is going to be built, it's going to be net zero ready. That's what we have to do. That is how it's going to perform. The co-benefits of these high performance designs of, better fresh air, more thermal comfort for occupants, better placemaking and access to open spaces. These are the things that are really going to become the marketing drivers of these high performance buildings, which is great because in some ways, energy is kind of boring. Let's solve that and move on to really making, homes places that can be celebrated and really great space making.
Okay, great. Tom G, I mean, you head up our modular side of the business, and you're seeing a big upturn in work within your field. I mean, how do you see the next 5 years panning out for modular construction where you are?
I think you're going to see more growth in projects utilizing offsite and modular construction practices. I mean, currently they represent probably less than 5% of the total construction industry, but I think by probably 2030, we could see that, increasing significantly. I don't think it'll be ever I would like to see it as the dominant thing, but I think that's a long way off. But I think we'll certainly grow beyond 5%. I think there's going to be further development in high performance panelized wall systems. That are constructed off-site that integrate windows, glazing, solar shading, and create an assembly that has better thermal performance. And we're certainly going to see much more full 3D volumetric modules built in in manufacturing facilities, similar to some of the projects that Tom was highlighting, which was really exciting. A really great presentation, Tom, and really cool projects. So I think, on all those aspects, either panelized or full volumetric, there needs to be a focus on reducing air leakage, getting rid of thermal bridges, increasing insulation levels, and making good use of glazing for solar gains.
Okay, great. So Tom Bloxham, next 5 years then, where do you see things going from your side of things?
Well, I'm an optimist, and you can't do my job without being an optimist. So, I'm very positive about life. And I think, even all the terrible things about COVID that have happened, one of, I suppose, the positive things is people have appreciated much more the space they've got at home, much more the outdoor space, much more the ability of a quality of environment. And so, I think placemaking is coming to the fore. The real tragedy is some of those schemes that you've seen is the third time in people's livelihoods that we've been actually developing on spaces. It's the third time homes have been destroyed in a single person's livelihood. And that is the most unsustainable, worst space. And conversely, building really good quality buildings, building the buildings we build today to last for hundreds of years is the most sustainable development of doing stuff of real high quality. And that for me is, the other speaker said, is much more just about being energy efficient. It's about placemaking. It's about places where we want to work, where we want to play, where we want to hang out. And it's about, all the elements of good design and public realm and public and private and community building and communal areas. And that's what I suppose makes it exciting for us. And I think the world is changing, and I think this is the future. And I think, value-driven organizations are the ones in the ascendancy. And I think people are coming back to great contemporary architecture. So I'm an optimist, and I've seen the future, and it's good and it's green.
That's great. Yeah. Thanks for that. Before I go on to some further questions of our panelists, with regard to the audience out there, if you've got any questions that you want to ask, please send them through, raise your hand or send a message on the chat line, and we'll pick them up at the end of the presentation. Tom G, again, I'm following on from your question just now. Are you working on any solutions that you think can, really push forward and allow us to achieve greater sustainability in the modular market?
Yeah, I think we're working on completing a number of projects using full volumetric modules and also panelized off-site construction strategies. So on all these projects, we're really looking at the industrialization of construction, and by that, bringing, like Tom was presenting, bringing workers out from the elements and into a controlled environment. And what that allows us to do is, we get a reduction in the operational energy. We can use more efficient processes and tools to complete the work. We have less time on site, so we have less heating and temporary power and things like that are, just a large reduction in the operational energy, and then the opportunity to get that energy from clean or green sources or renewable energy sources. A huge benefit is, a reduction in material waste generation and greater opportunity for reuse of materials. Most of us or all of us have probably been on construction sites, and we've seen just the amount of waste that's generated and taken to landfills. As cities that we work in become more dense, it's a lot harder to get materials to the job site, and there's a lot less storage space on them. So moving all of that production off site will help that, and then you have less trucks coming to the project site. You can center more of your workforce around the manufacturing facility, so less travel time. Again, reduce disruption to the project sites.
Okay, great. I mean, one of the things I've been battling with over the years as a structural engineer is this idea of optimization versus rationalization. I mean, with the modular designs and working within factories, are you able to get the benefit of both? Can you sort of really optimize your design right down and and still keep the processes sort of efficient?
Yeah, it is a balancing act, and it's well suited for particular markets like residential or affordable housing, long-term or care facilities where you've got a repeatable module or a repeatable design that you can use in many locations. But yeah, you do have to balance the rationalization with the material efficiency and trying to, the most efficient structural design may be good, but it may not suit the manufacturing process because you don't want to be trying to build different modules. So you might need to set it to work more with the manufacturing line.
Okay, thanks for that. How about Tristan? What do you, how do you conceive? How do we achieve greater sustainable development? What solutions do you see coming up in the future?
I think it's really going to involve a shift to the passive design elements from the point of view of energy and occupant comfort. Really working with what the environment is giving you in the first place. Some of those units that were presented in Tom's presentation, even just the making sure that they have the ability to cross ventilate, I think is often lost. Just the ability to really have windows that can provide useful ventilation to their occupants. And really always thinking passively first, how much can we achieve before we even get involved with mechanical and electrical systems? And then just use those to be, sort of the icing on the cake to get us the rest of the way up. The thing about this is it's not space age, it's almost sort of the reverse in the sense that, good passive design thinking and principles are millennia old. So it really is about not trying to almost over design and overthink the problem and really push high-tech solutions at it, but to just be really thoughtful and deliberate from the outset so that you can hit your targets.
Yeah, thanks, Tristan. Emily, we've had some conversations recently with regard to concrete and materials. I mean, what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think that the materials piece is definitely a big piece of the pie. It's not the only piece. There's lots of things that can be done from a systems approach, a structural framing approach to be able to reduce materials, but material selection is big as well. And I think there's a lot of really great innovation taking place right now in the industry. It's like almost every day you can see something new, a new innovation in concrete or some other type of material, aggregates, whatever it may be, just ways to be reducing the amount of actual concrete that we're using and ideally the amount of cement we're using. So I think what we're going to need to see is more investment and like a rapid advance in testing these new technologies and getting them into the hands of designers to feel comfortable designing with these new technologies. I think technology is going to be, the big push to get us to where we need to go for reducing carbon in the built environment. And I think all designers need to be able to embrace that as well. I mean, to Tristan's point, the passive approach is great. Like that, definitely, let's do that first. But we absolutely know that we still need concrete in our structures. And so, let's find the most innovative ways to be reducing the greenhouse gases that come from that concrete. And so I think getting those materials ready for designers to be implementing into our structures and buildings is absolutely essential. I think another piece to this is also training. We need to make sure that the entire workforce across the AEC industry is really prepared and properly educated to be able to plan, design, build, maintain, and operate these high-performance buildings. It's from absolute start to absolute finish, and the finish is really throughout the entire life of the building. It doesn't really end, especially if we're looking at circularity principles as well. So yeah, that's what I think we also need to be focusing on for a sustainable development.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for that. I think the training piece is so important. I mean, that's across the board, and training clients as well to start thinking differently. So it's going to be a big piece. But so go, Tom Bloxham. One of the things that interests me is some of the myths about sustainable development and how we can debunk them. I mean, from a developer's perspective, I mean, do the benefits outweigh the costs?
I mean, doing things well definitely takes longer, and it probably does cost more. And to say it doesn't cost more is, it's probably fooling ourselves, and it certainly takes a lot more energy and effort. But our view certainly is making great places pays back more than the cost of it, and particularly in the long term, we prove the value of it by seeing the resale values of our homes. When people sell an Urban Splash home, they actually say it's an Urban Splash home, which you get from very few developers. And so, you know, I think it is both the right thing to do, but it's also the economically right thing to do, and it's the, you know, the way to generate best value.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Tristan, how about you? You must have some ideas on how we can debunk some of these myths.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the biggest myth for me is it's just sort of riffing on exactly what Tom said, that, you know, it will be more expensive or frequently be more expensive, but not prohibitively so. In some ways, it will just be a different allocation of costs, in the sense that you really need to take a very systems approach to your buildings design, and maybe you are investing more heavily in, you know, the upfront target setting or analysis or the envelope design, but that's allowing you to scale back on your active system costs. So, you know, the size of the heating system that you need, for instance. Yeah, and so there really is a trade-off, but the thing is that really requires thinking about sustainable design right from the outset, where sustainability and you know, high performance becomes really prohibitively expensive is when it's treated as sort of this bolt-on after the fact of like, oh, well, we've got this building design. Hey, it's the 11th hour. How do we make it green? And it's just, you know, it's going to cost. But when things are approached from the outset with a clear target in mind of where you want to go, you know, it can be a very achievable goal with minimal cost premiums.
Yeah, I think I would like to add in on top of that, and with what Tom and Tristan have both been saying, you know, like there could be these additional costs up front, but you see the savings over the life of the building. But there's also so many other benefits to the owners and the users and occupants of these buildings as well. You know, there are those operational savings that can be, you know, between 20 to 40% based on some studies, but there's also all of the health and wellness benefits that come from having these sustainable buildings that take this very holistic approach to making sure that there is this well-being aspect to building them. So, I mean, there's some studies that showed that the health and wellness benefits to occupants could be, you know, 18% more productivity in commercial spaces, like in office buildings. There could be shorter hospital stays, or a 10 to 25% improvement in mental function and memory as well. So it just overall, occupants of these high performance sustainable buildings have this improved well-being, which is a really important piece to consider as well. We don't want to be just looking at, you know, one aspect of each of these things. We do want to have this triple bottom line approach always to sustainable development, of looking at, you know, social, financial, and environmental sustainability.
Yeah, that makes sense. How about Tom G? What's your views on it?
I think the biggest myth is that it needs to be hard, or that it needs to be revolutionary. I think small step changes can have meaningful impacts. I think we know what needs to be done. It's just having the fortitude to actually implement it and do it. And I think those that are holding out with, you know, past practices and thinking implementation of sustainable designs tomorrow or down the road is going to be easier, I think they're going to soon find themselves alone, and the building industry is going to move on. So I think we, you know, I maybe second what Tristan said, like looking at sustainability as this bolt-on or add-on or thing thought at the end of the design cycle is just not the right approach. It needs to be front and center, right from the beginning of the project and right through the life, like Emily was saying.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Well, we're sort of getting near the end of the evening now, and I've just got one final question for you guys, and I'll start with Tom B. Are you excited for the future? And if so, what are you most optimistic about?
I'm always excited for the future.
Yeah, forget about football, but so let's, yeah.
Oh, apart from the football, otherwise you wouldn't get out of bed. I see in the world is changing, and you know, people were just talking about, in any of these conferences, you go to previous ones, the private sector would just be talking about net to gross, yield, return. Public sector would just be talking about unit numbers and value for money. And now we see increasingly conversations like we had today about sustainability, about the future, about saving our planet, about making better places to live. we've actually outlawed the word units, and we've got swear box. Every time someone says I'm building 100 units, you put a penny for every unit. Because we're not building units, we're building people's homes. And the quality of those homes will affect people's lives dramatically for the rest of their lives. And all of us working in the built environment, there's a big onus on us to actually make things better and improve the quality of the homes and workspaces. And I think that is becoming increasingly common. And I think there's a shared agenda about being sustainable, being green, making a better world for our kids to live in. And that makes me feel very positive.
That's great. That's great to hear. Emily, you're always an optimistic person.
Well, I think Tom has said it beautifully. Yeah, there's lots to be optimistic about. I guess one piece that I'm quite optimistic about is just in the last year, there have been so many more conversations that I've been noticing of clients looking to understand more about sustainability and how they can be incorporating these best practices on their projects. We're seeing it in RFPs, we're getting emails from clients, there's these requests. So people are aware that this is something that's important, and that's very, very encouraging. They, we really believe our clients want to be part of this solution. They want to understand how they can be making a positive impact, knowing that buildings, as they are right now, can have a very negative impact. And so I'm very encouraged by the conversations that are taking place, especially conversations like this one, and the level of interest and drive and passion that there is to really creating this sustainable future. There's so many people that are so driven every single day to be making these big changes, and this big tidal wave of support is really what we need to be moving into this really next critical decade of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm very encouraged by what I've been seeing.
That's great. How about Tom G?
Yeah, absolutely. Who couldn't be optimistic about the future? I think for all the past achievements in the built environment that have occurred, I feel like there's many more to come. So I'm probably, after a vaccine, I'm probably most optimistic about the industrialization of construction, energy storage systems, and smart technology systems. Keep it short.
Tristan, you're working right at the front end of design at the moment, so you must have some good thoughts coming forward.
Yeah, I think the shift that we're really starting to see towards focus on the just documented energy performance and the upping the game for the existing buildings. As an energy modeler, there's a lot of flack that we take for sort of the predictions that we take or that we make in the modeling performance gap in the design process, but really flipping that around and looking at outcome-based codes that are coming to the fore, and things like New York City's Climate Mobilization Act that is really just taking, this is how your building's performing, and there's a penalty if it's above a certain carbon threshold. These are not politically easy things to put into place, but they are entirely necessary to really sort of pull up that floor, while people like those of us on this call are really looking to push the ceiling as high as we can at the same time.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Tristan. Okay, well, look, we're nearly coming to the end of the event. I've got a question here for you, Emily, from Simon Ho from S2 Architecture in Vancouver. Crikey, it's early part of the day out there. How do we transform local Vancouver developers to accept high-performance buildings? Seeing that the run-of-the-mill developers here only worry about the bottom line.
That is definitely a good question, and something that we've been thinking about a lot as well, is how do you convince developers? And so I think one piece of it is that these high performance buildings are highly marketable. People want to be living in these really well performing and comfortable, sustainable spaces, especially as Tom had mentioned earlier. The younger generation really sees this as a big value. And I think that we're going to see, those values come into practice when it comes to purchasing a place to live. So, if it is, a condo development, for example, I think people are going to be a lot more likely to want to live somewhere that they know had a really high quality of design and construction, and that they're going to feel very comfortable living there, especially if we were talking about passive survivability with the increasing weather events that we are seeing through climate change. I think that's one piece of it, the marketing aspect, that could be something beneficial for developers. But I think also there's opportunities for lower cost in the actual development. If we're looking at truly optimized designs, and being very intentional with, you know, the loading that we're selecting and the framing systems and whatnot, I think there's opportunities to be reducing the amount of materials we're using, which has that added benefit of reducing embodied carbon as well. So I think it's going to take a lot of innovation and collaboration between design teams and developers to get there, but I think it's absolutely possible.
That's a great response, and an optimistic one as well, so that's brilliant. Okay, right, we've run right out of time. That was a great discussion, and I'd really like to thank all of our panelists. I think we can all agree that we need more of these types of discussions because it's we've got to get the ball rolling and get it going quicker and quicker. And the more we talk about it, the better it'll be and the easier it'll be. I can promise you one thing though, that Intuitive will never stop looking to the future and working with industry leaders like Tom to build sustainable communities. And thank you again for joining today. And I hope you found the discussions thought-provoking. For those of you who are interested, we will be sharing the event video in the coming days. So for now, wherever you are, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.